All righty. Let's get ready for our book read. Some light up in here. One thing that I will say about Minnesota is it's very dark around here. It's over dark. So, all right. So, for those who do not know, on top of recording over here on TikTok, I am also on my YouTube. If you want to see more of the reading that we've done in the past, that'll be the YouTube because it automatically uploads and stuff like that after we're done. Nothing too special, but I don't have fancy cameras to work off of. So we're going to continue reading on in our book. I kind of cut it off last time a little early because I got tired. So the chapter that we left off on, let's see here, was chapter 7, which was 20th century anti-movement. One thing that I will say is when I am reading this particular book, I do have to kind of rearrange some of the wording and what have you because of like mod regulations between the two different apps that I'm running this off of. Okay. So if you're all like, well, blah, 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 it sounds the way for the reason. Okay. A pattern emerged from the way that these countries had reacted to situations of link between pertussis immunization and neurologic disorders. In countries where anti-vaccine rhetoric had taken hold, but public office health officials maintained a strong disease surveillance, measures to assure the public were taken and maintained. Strong immunization programs were maintained, and pertussis did not return. In countries where doubts took hold and the public health officials capitulated by moving away from the pertussis vaccination, vaccination rates dropped and outbreaks occurred. The outbreaks ceased once immunizations resumed. This conclusion is compatible with the research showing that the motivations of governments and individuals differ when it comes to immunization decisions. Governments are primarily concerned with the costs, whereas individuals are primarily concerned with the perceived risks. Collectively, immunization protects non-vaccinated individuals through herd immunity as well. Absent collective motivations, individuals would choose to vaccinate at lower rates. In the United States, the DPT scare resulted in a series of lawsuits filed against the three manufacturers of the immunization. Wyeth Laboratories stopped manufacturing the immunization because of their low profitability and the risk of litigation. By 1984, Connaught Laboratories, the second of the three major manufacturers of the immunization, had halted production, citing risk of lawsuits. Their stoppages led to a shortage of pertussis immunization. The number of lawsuits filed related to the DPT vaccine rose from 2 suites to more than 250 suites in 1986. The latter seeking a total of $3.162 billion. Several large payouts were awarded and several settlements were reached. Where doubt had been created, lawyers swarmed, demanding large payouts for their clients and themselves. The shortage created by these legal actions put DPT immunization rates at risk of dropping, and the public health officials became concerned about an outbreak. The National Childhood Immunization Injury Act of 1986 was the U.S. Congress response to this risk of vaccine availability. The act's intent was both to create a system for monitoring possible unknown reactions from immunizations and to allow patients who met certain criteria to receive compensation without threatening the supply of vaccines necessary to maintain public health. The act recognized that the private manufacture of immunizations, which were necessary for public health, required legal protections. When manufacture is unprofitable, corporations lose interest. One of the more notable outcomes of this act was the establishment of the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, or VICP, in 1988 to compensate for those children who were immunized by routine childhood immunizations. Although these concerns about the DTP immunization turned out to be unfounded, occasionally adverse reactions do occur in some immunizations. The VICP provides a list of such reactions, and patients who experience these events within a specified time frame may ask for compensation. The program now compensates medical and legal costs, provides up to $250,000 for pain and suffering, and offers a unaliving benefit of $250,000. Legal fees may be covered even if a claim is not accepted. Occasionally, the existence of the immunization court or compensation to those seeking it through a VICP is used by anti-vaccine activists to suggest that there is a broad recognition that immunizations are in fact genuinely dangerous. However, legal standards of evidence are not the same as scientific standards of evidence. Legal judgments do not determine scientific truth. The VICP has a standard of evidence lower than used in criminal trials or scientific research. The VICP will compensate based on preponderance of evidence, a term that means that the person evaluating the evidence for a claim believes that there is more of a 50% probability that the proposition is true. Or in other words, this is a low bar. In 2005, Athleen versus Secretary of Health and Human Services found that an individual case where the court required confirmation of medical plausibility from the medical community and literature, the NCVIA did not require objective confirmation in its standard of evidence, only medical records or medical opinion. Effectively, the ruling in this case lowered the standard of evidence such as biologic plausibility, and scientific evidence were irrelevant to the legal determinations for compensation of injury. Starting in 2008, this lowered the standard of evidence that came into play in several cases in subsequent years, allowing compensation for a variety of ailments with no biologically plausible link to vaccination, such as chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and MS. One well-publicized case was that of Hannah Poling, who at 19 months received immunization for DTaP, HIV, MMR, varicella, polio. Several months later, developed symptoms of developmental delay, diagnosed encephalopathy caused by mitochondrial enzyme deficit. The Polings won compensation through VICP despite the absence of biologic plausibility or scientific evidence of causation. They held a press conference announcing the legal ruling, and the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention responded, pointing out that the ruling was not proof of a link between immunizations and ASD. Nevertheless, this is a case that has been used by anti-vaccine activists to suggest a link between that and autism, proven in court of law. And just to make note for my people streaming over on TikTok, this is an educational book reading, which is allowed by community guidelines. So I should make note of that. I am also streaming over on YouTube if anything shall happen, or if you want to see the reading of the other chapters. Legal rulings have no bearing on scientific and medical truth. Like scientists, legal professionals are interested in finding the truth. Well, at least sometimes. However, the means that the legal profession uses to arrive at decisions are different from those used in science. In a legal ruling, a decision must be reached. In scientific inquiry, the starting point of every investigation, I don't know, is the default standpoint and is most common endpoint for an investigation. There is not specific rules that scientists must follow to the letter while evaluating evidence. However, there are heuristics and scientific virtues that scientists follow and apply when conducting, evaluating, and peer reviewing evidence. Results published in the scientific literature are not considered to be final, but may at any time be reconsidered in the light of additional evidence, conflicting experiments, or new discoveries. Only rarely does a scientific proposition rise to the point where it is considered to be a theory, which is accepted to be true pending further evidence, or a new model that better explains existing data. Legal rulings by the VICP do not determine scientific truth. Rather, they determine if a case presented meets the standards set out in law. These standards are often flawed and partial. So the rulings that Dorothy Poling was entitled to compensation under the VICP was a ruling that she met the legal requirements set forth by the law to receive compensation. This ruling did not bear on the scientific question. The NCVIA also led to the establishment of the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, as you all know as VAERS. This system allows healthcare providers and individuals to report events following immunization so that the CDC and the FDA can detect unknown adverse reactions to immunizations, identify factors that might cause some patients to be at risk for reactions, identify safety issues, and identify bad batches or clusters that may occur. VAERS requires healthcare providers to report certain events such as shoulder injuries related to fainting, unaliving within a specified window following immunizations. Those who are not healthcare workers may also report to this system, and there is no requirement that events reported to VAERS be factually associated with an event. This has been exploited. Following the discredited 1998 Lancet article attempting to draw a link between MMR and ASD, the number of reports of ASD through VAERS spiked. Those making those reports disproportionately associated MMR with autism, many citing personal websites as sources of information. A 2006 study showed that over time, the number of VAERS reports related to litigation was increasing, and that a disproportionate fraction of these reports were filed by lawyers seeking litigation. To demonstrate that associations made by using the data were dubious value, James Ladler submitted a VAERS report claiming that the following influenza immunization he had turned into a comic character, the Hulk. By the way, you can still see this on VAERS if you go and look. He was asked to withdraw the report. Despite these limitations, VAERS is a useful tool for legitimate researchers hoping to identify possible patterns of adverse events, so long as the potential limitations are understood and proper statistical methods are used. The NCVIA also established the National Vaccine Program Office within the Department of Health and Human Services. Wait a second. What was told not to report anymore? Who did that? Huh. Swore there was an executive order saying that we couldn't put out health information anymore to the public. Now, who would have done that? I'll be. Anyway, continuing on with the book. This office is responsible for coordinating between multiple federal agencies and offices that play a role in safety, distribution, and development, as well as staffing the National Advisory Committee. The NCVIA required that information statements be provided by healthcare providers alongside certain immunizations. These statements are developed by the CDC and contain information about immunizations being administered, the disease being prevented, and the people who may have contraindications against them. For example, the 2018 flu immunization is contraindicated with patients with severe allergies because of the production method often uses eggs, which may cause allergic reactions. These statements also include information about possible risks associated with immunizations and what to do in the case of this. Despite reporting requirements, time-limited healthcare providers may not have opportunity to provide every patient with VIS. However, they are supposed to, and every person that I've ever given one to has gotten a VIS or a VIS. So we are going to continue on over here, but kind of like that. Kind of looking through the comments over here real quick. All right. The eighth chapter, I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna end up getting censored a lot because of the mod requirements. but I'm going to push on anyway because this particular chapter I feel is really important to the subject matter. It deals with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, for all intents and purposes between the separate apps that I'm streaming on. And like I said, if you want to see the other parts of reading that I've done with this, that's over on my YouTube. You can find that on my link tree. Um, for all intents and purposes, though, we're going to refer to it as ASD going through because of the mod systems. Okay. Chapter 8, ASD. Starting in the late 1990s, many of the claims made by anti immunization activists have been related to ASD. To understand what's being discussed, it is helpful to know that ASD actually is and what we know about its origins and what we know about its treatment. Following this, we can discuss those claims more in detail. A modern understanding recognizes ASD as a broad range of neurodevelopmental disorders sharing feature of repetition and difficulty in both social situations and with communication. Currently, 1 to 2% of children are diagnosed as being somewhere on the spectrum. In the past, the number of children diagnosed was lower. The change is most likely due to an improved definition and better understanding of ASD, greater access to resources for parents of ASD, and leading more to seek diagnosis and wider access to medical care. Although no one was diagnosed until the 1750s. ASD individuals were born at the time simply had no appropriate label. The first description of ASD and the coining of the term occurred in 1943 in Autistic Disturbances in Affective Contract, a paper by the psychiatrist and physician Leo Kanner. Kanner noted that the syndrome presented was probably more common than indicated by a small number of cases he had assembled, and that several of the children that he had studied had been introduced to him by, I can't say that for the one app, uh, by silly people. I'm just going to say silly people. He said some pretty derogatory terms there. Since the publication of that paper, the definition of ASD has expanded to include a wider breadth of behaviors and symptoms, and it is now recognized as spectrum that can range from severe impairments to relatively minor differences in social behavior. Part of the difficulty in defining ASD comes from applying a single label to a large set of behaviors and people. It's likely that there are multiple underlying factors that can lead to the development of ASD. One of the factors we want to understand about traits is the degree which is given to trait developments due to mutable environmental factors compared to genetic or epigenetic factors that are passed down from parent to child. When scientists want to understand the degree with which a trait is inherited, they develop a statistic called heritability index, which indicates the rate in a population that can be explained by inheritance. As an example, the trait stubbornness might have gosh, sorry. I'm just laughing about it. Stubbornness might have an index of 0.7. That does not mean that 70% of a person's stubbornness is caused by genes and 30% by environment. Rather, it means that the variation in the trait is 70% explained by the presence of that trait in the person's parents. In a situation where the environment changes and makes more variation in stubbornness, the factor of stubbornness would increase. Some traits may be heritable, not strictly through genetics. For example, heritability index suggests that college education can be inherited. That does not mean that the education is a genetic trait, but rather a social and environment factor as well that can be passed down parent to child. For example, if your parents came from wealth, you're more likely to be able to be accepted into a high paying college type of a thing. Anyway, the index for ASD is consistently measured at about 0.9. If an identical twin has ASD, there is roughly a 64% chance that its twin also has ASD, while fraternal twins do not share identical DNA, are only 9% likely to have ASD if their twin has ASD, while their non-twin siblings have only a 3% chance of having ASD. In about 40% of cases, studying the genetics of an individual with ASD can point to an underlying genetic cause, such as a chromosomal abnormality, such as Fragile X syndrome, or polymorphism that has been associated with this condition. Altogether, these data strongly indicate that ASD is largely controlled by inherited biologic factors, including genetics. In 2019, the largest and most statistically powerful study to date, which included more than 2 million participants, found ASD was about 80% heritable. An example I like to use is my two nephews who are twins. They are both on the spectrum. My little brother is also on the spectrum. My little brother was diagnosed being on the spectrum prior to being immunized. And this is a true story. So, propaganda or not, 'tis the way of things. Another thing that I will note for over on TikTok app, this is for educational purposes. This is a book reading. If you want to go over to YouTube, you're also able to see prior readings and things of the sort over there as well, where it's going to be recorded and stored. So you can also join me over there. Any little bit helps for future. So also, I will make note that because this is a book reading, you can get upset about what I'm reading, but it's a book. You're getting upset at books. Why hasn't a single ASD gene been found? Some traits, such as height, are so-called polygenic traits. This means that in humans, the variation in more than one gene can lead to the final height of an individual. There are not just tall and short humans. There is a spectrum of heights centered around a mean or an average height, with most individuals being close to an average and fewer individuals being far taller or far shorter than average. Some genetic factors, such as the presence of a Y chromosome, have a large influence on height, while other genetic factors have a smaller one. That's weird. Sorry, my app over on this side was throwing a fit. Some genetic factors, such as the presence of a Y chromosome, have a small influence on height, while others have a smaller contribution. Although a person with a Y chromosome and an X chromosome is, on average, likely to be taller than a person with two X chromosomes, there are many other examples of those with Y and X chromosomes who are shorter than others with two X chromosomes. So, except in rare cases, it is not possible to know the precise combination of genetic variations that a person has based solely on knowing that person's height. Likewise, there is not a single gene that causes ASD, and it is not possible to predict somebody's genes just from the presence of ASD behaviors. The complex set of behavioral traits to which we assign the term autism spectrum disorder is a complex set of genes that contribute to the final observed trait. We only know some of them, but work is ongoing to discover the others. Most likely, there's a contribution between variability of hundreds of genes. The goals of this work are to discover new means of improving the quality of life for people on the autism spectrum, to offer earlier diagnosis, to provide improved educational resources, and to develop an understanding of the genes that influence the development of ASD so that potential parents might be provided with better genetic counseling. Because the diagnosis of ASD is based on behavior, and because behavior can have many causes, we will never have a single cause in all cases. The earliest detectable signs of ASD between the ages of 2 and 6 months may appear. When attention to eyes decline in infants, by 2 years of age, eye contact can be significantly impaired in children with ASD. ASD is usually diagnosed in the first 36 months of life. Although many are now diagnosed as adults, boys are 4 or 3 to 1 more likely than girls to be diagnosed. Although it's likely that girls are underdiagnosed, and studies have been highly variable in their results. The symptoms of ASD can include displaying little eye contact, delays in speech and language, difficulty with changes to environment, sensitivity to certain sensory stimuli, such as smell or sounds, repetitive behaviors, and narrowed interests. In the late 1990s, even less was known about the origins of autism than is now. People were eager to fill those gaps. Many of the anti vaccine claims have been developed in the last 2 decades, reference fears related to the development of ASD in children. These claims have followed roughly two parallel tracks, which have become conflated. The first centers around scientific papers that claim that combined MMR used in England resulted in a kind of regressive ASD. The second centers around the idea that thimerosal, a preservative used in immunization, started in the 1930s and largely ending in the 2000s, was causing ASD symptoms through a kind of heavy metal. Both of these claims have since been proven to be false. So, that was chapter 8. So, a couple of things to note. Like I said, once again, for the brief period of time and whatnot that I am here, I also record these book readings over on the YouTube for looking at if you want to later on. I'm gonna go over what we just read and a little bit over on the TikTok side of things, and we're just gonna save the stream for those 2 chapters here, so we can kind of discuss